and people who are joining us remotely for this conversation about policy that impacts all of our communities, and especially policy that addresses poverty and inequality in this country. The Center for Public Theology and Public Policy, as you can probably tell from the name, is very committed here at the Divinity School to exploring the questions of how our commitments, our faith commitments to God and to one another connect with the way we engage with the world, especially the way that we collectively shape the world through policy. And we have been, for the past 2 years here, cultivating conversations where people who do research and who practice in fields related to public life, what's being learned about policy in those spaces, but also what theologians and biblical scholars are drawing from the text and from conversations in our faith communities about our moral obligations. And putting those in conversation with one another is really important to what we're trying to do. So it's really the desire of this conversation today to kind of start that conversation up here and to bring you all into it. And Reverend Barber, Reverend William Barber, our founding director, was scheduled to be here and to host this conversation. Unfortunately, he is sick today and has been ordered to bed rest by his doctor, and so he's following those orders, and we're going to do our best to keep this conversation going and to honor what he had hoped for this to be. So I am here in his stead, certainly not filling in or replacing him, but I'll do my best. Which I'd like to start by introducing the people who are going to start our conversation. And I'll introduce all three and then invite you to come up and take your seats. So we have with us today Alan Curtis, my apologies. Alan Curtis from the Eisenhower Foundation, who is going to introduce an important policy project that's been going on for decades now as really an extension of the work that was done with the original Kerner Commission. And so he'll share more about that. But there is a recent update of the consistent reporting they've been doing on the best research about policy across many areas that impact inequality, and it's called Creating Justice. So in many ways, we're going to kind of center our conversation around what is in this most recent report, which he'll tell us about, called Creating Justice. We also are delighted to have our colleague from the law school, Elizabeth Hinton, who is here, and who is an expert on how various forces responded to the policy proposals of the Kerner Commission and what that led to in the immediate decade or so after that. She's written whole books on this, but she will distill all of it and help us to kind of bring it into conversation with this today. And we're also delighted to have our colleague from, if you haven't been over to the center, we're just next door in this building, and share that space with the Center for Faith and Culture, which Miroslav Volf directs. He is a theologian, but also a very engaged theologian that's interested in these questions of how our faith plays out in public life. So we'll get into, for all of you theology students, we'll get into sort of where does theology touch on these policy issues, and we'll invite him to lead us into that. So let me invite all of you up here, and I will hand the microphone over to Alan. Please greet all of our panelists warmly as they come. There you go. I think you're live there, so.
Good afternoon. I have the boring part. I'm going to give you a prepared talk. The best part will come afterwards when we have the informal back and forth.
Well, you're going to give us something to talk about, so thank you.
Yeah, but I apologize for giving the formal part. But I appreciate this opportunity to be with you all as we continue really to honor this week the legacy of Dr. King. A fortnight ago, I sat in a Washington National Cathedral pew at the funeral of President Jimmy Carter. Ahead of my wife and myself, all 5 of the living presidents were sitting next to the flag-draped coffin: Biden, Bush, Clinton, Obama, and Trump. It was a powerful scene. Did these men really agree on anything? Could they agree on the honor, integrity, and morality of President Carter, perhaps? I asked myself. Honor, integrity, and morality, these are themes integral to this afternoon's forum, and I wish really to deeply thank Jonathan and Bishop Barber for organizing it. Thank you as well to Professor Hinton, Professor Volf for presenting, and for Elizabeth for the work she's already done with us on this project and for her inspiration in the field. My role today then is to briefly overview creating justice in a multiracial democracy, which is the name of our new update of the 1968 Kerner Commission, which was, the book was just published by Columbia Teachers College Press. In response to the disturbances in over 150 cities in the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson formed the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, the Kerner Commission, which was chaired by the governor of Illinois, Otto Kerner. Most of those commissioners were privileged white men, yet the commission warned in 1968 that America was heading towards, quote, 2 societies, black and white, separate and unequal, and the commission warned against white racism. The commission concluded, it is time to make good the promises of American democracy to all citizens, urban and rural, black and white, Spanish surname, American Indian, and every minority group, unquote. It still is time, of course, and we are very aware of how Dr. King and Senator Robert Kennedy endorsed the Kerner Commission in 1968, and then they both were assassinated in that terrible year. In our new Creating Justice update, we return to Kerner priorities, and we're focused on the long run. We offer a baseline against which to measure progress or lack of progress over the years to come, and especially over the next 4 years. We will hold the federal government accountable for reducing economic inequality, poverty, and racial injustice over those 4 years. We will communicate common sense feedback from Americans at the grassroots. We will be mindful of how the system is increasingly dominated by billionaires. The Kerner Commission concluded in 1968 that we know a great deal about what works to reduce economic inequality, poverty, and racial injustice in poor and working class neighborhoods. Based on decades of evaluation since, we know much more today about what works. Yet the 2024 presidential campaign did not thoughtfully debate what works and what doesn't work. As editor of Creating Justice, let me share with you just a few examples of failure to discuss these things in the 2024 election. Campaign dialogue and media coverage spent little time in 2024 on how federal, state, and local policies need to be based on facts, science, and evidence, not on supposition, denial, misinformation, and disinformation. Yet perhaps the most urgent moral issue of our time is getting a firm hold on what is true and what is false. Truth remains truth. Lies remain lies. Without access to the truth, we cannot make wise decisions in our public life. I say this, of course, as Facebook and X have dismantled fact-checking. What about the other 2024 campaign failures? A few examples. The 1968 Kerner Commission gave first priority to wise decisions on economic policy. By contrast, why was there such a failure in the 2024 campaign to communicate how poor, working class, and middle class Americans have been exploited by the rich, the privileged, and corporations, especially since the 1980s? Insufficient media attention was given to the dramatic reductions in taxes paid by the richest Americans and corporations since the Eisenhower administration in the 50s, and to the massive increase in wealth inequality and income inequality that has since resulted. The tax rate for the 400 richest Americans now is lower than the tax rate for the bottom half of American income earners. It's lower. Why wasn't that adequately debated in 2024, especially in light of how public opinion polls have shown that poor working class and middle class citizens are deeply concerned about inequality? We now have a tech industrial complex that matches the military industrial complex. We now have a new Gilded Age oligarchy with mind-numbing conflicts of interest. The 2024 campaign and its media coverage did not sufficiently debate the failure of trickle-down economics. The myth of trickle-down market fundamentalism has been called zombie economics by Nobel Prize winners because tax breaks for the rich and corporations keep coming back to life again and again in spite of their evidence-based past failures. As a result of the 2024 election, zombie economic policy now is exploding still again, disproportionately punishing the working class, low-income people, and the middle class. Fortunately, in recent years, a new economic mindset has been evolving. It is bubble up, not trickle down. It gives priority to low-income, working class, and middle class families. It is designed to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. It is woven into new industrial and new antitrust policy. And there is some bipartisan support, yet why wasn't there genuine debate during the election campaign over how bubble up has worked and trickle down has failed? And why isn't there any debate today? The 1968 Kerner Commission gave equally high priority to education policy, yet the 2024 campaign and its media coverage had little to say about how K-12 school segregation has increased since Kerner. It's increased. Reading and math achievement gaps between whites and people of color have increased. Absenteeism in the school-to-prison pipeline has grown, and school vouchers have failed based on careful evaluations. There was almost no 2024 campaign dialogue on reauthorizing federal support for proven grassroots mentoring and tutoring to close the school achievement gap. No attention to reauthorizing the child tax credit legislation that reduced poverty by half during the pandemic, but then shamefully was not reorganized. There was no attention paid to scaling up the early education and community school programs that have been rigorously evaluated as successful. No attention to reversing the national teacher shortage, which grew worse during the pandemic, and no attention paid to reforming K-12 school financing based on the life status of students rather than on local property taxes. Beyond the need for wise economic and education policy that creates justice, why did the 2024 campaign not debate police reform, mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, and gun control? Why did the 2024 campaign not debate the record surge in homelessness nationally to almost 20%? Why did the 2024 campaign not acknowledge how poor people in America can expect to die 12 years sooner than rich people? I'm simply illustrating here that from the perspective of our new update, Creating Justice, there was so little discussion in the 2024 campaign of what works and what doesn't work in economic, education, criminal justice, housing, and public health policy. Accordingly, in our criminal justice update, we lay out successful and unsuccessful policy in each of these domains. Yet identifying what works is not enough. The 1968 Kerner Commission warned that to legislate, fund, and implement what works at a scale equal to the dimensions of the problem, we need new political will in America. New political will. Sadly, today, we still need new will. What then are some of the strategies to create new will that we suggest in Creating Justice? We need to strengthen the democracy of voting. On balance, electoral democracy was better defended in 2024 than in 2020. But we need to be extremely vigilant now. Billionaire-backed advocacy groups continue to lobby hard for new state-level legislation designed to block voter turnout. We need to build on the grassroots evidence and experience of political strategist Annette Schenker-Osorio. In Creating Justice, Annette shows how messaging to voters in local campaigns for office can be successful at integrating both issues of class and issues of race. Such messaging can reinforce Kerner priorities. That messaging needs to better utilize how majorities of Americans across classes and races believe the privileged and corporations should pay more taxes and support child tax credits, preschool for all children, paid family leave, women's reproductive rights, expansion of labor unions, and a $15 federal minimum wage. These are all Creating Justice and Kerner priorities. As Bishop Barber and Jonathan have shared with us in their important new book, White Poverty, the creation of new will requires mass mobilization of the poor and near poor in elections. The mobilization needs to be around issues the poor and the near poor support, like higher wages, better schools, effective gun control, and police reform. We need to recognize that the poverty rate is higher for blacks than for whites, but the number of people in poverty is higher for whites than for blacks. So there is potential, perhaps, for alliance. We need to build on the recent YouGov survey that shows working-class Americans are supportive of many Kerner and Creating Justice priorities. And we need to reinforce how the economic justice movement created by Dr. King and continued by Bishop Barber identifies common ground between people of color and whites. Better mobilizing these and related constituencies to create new will means not just persuading people to vote, it also means better motivating more criminal Creating Justice and Kerner supportive citizens to run for office. Here the model for the future is reorganization of the progressive leadership pipelines formed by the late and great Senator Paul Wellstone through his nonprofit organization, Wellstone Action. We need to train. We need to create a new Department of Democracy, as advocated by Black Voters Matter co-founder Latosha Brown in Creating Justice. The mission of the Department of Democracy should include significantly reducing misinformation and disinformation in our democratic dialogue. One model we need to follow is Finland, which has successfully implemented K-12 evidence-based curricula to teach students